welcome to the Roundtable. This is the Roundtable that's been created and really kind of made famous by the one and only Bill Priestley. But today you have myself and Tony Mulvey, and we have the honor of welcoming on two of some of the most distinguished guests that we could have here at FreightWaves, John Kingston and Brian Strait. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, thanks guys. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, obviously the topic this week, and it's been this way for a while since the Supreme Court's rulings, the issue of the effect of AB5 and on gig workers, right? We talked a lot about those independent contract truck drivers, changing it up a little in this roundtable, talking about those gig workers. Brian, I'll start with you. You got a chance to tour the systems and practices of Viho. What were your kind of takeaways from that experience?
Yeah, it was interesting. I went down and went into the warehouse, and I went out with the head of driver, Kevin Johnson, and we did a route one day. About an hour and a half it took us. We did what they considered a short route, but it was a chance to experience kind of both sides of the equation here. All of us are consumers, and we buy all these e-commerce packages, and I think that we just expect them to show up on our porch. And this was an experience to see how they actually get to that porch, right? And how they get to us. So we went in, I went in and walked around and talked to some of the drivers that drive for them. They utilize gig workers for their deliveries. They have people in the warehouse are actually employees. So it's a combination for both there. And then we went out and we spent, like I said, about an hour and a half, made deliveries, experienced that process, and it was really quite efficient from what I found. The drivers come in, and they start coming in around 6 a.m. every day for what they call a launch. That's what Viho's terminology is for it. And the launch is where the drivers come in, and the Viho workers in the warehouse actually bring them over their packages for their delivery routes. They are all set up on carts, pre-done ahead of time, so it's easy, it's convenient. The drivers kind of scan in the packages, they load them into their car, and they take the routing recommendations often from Viho. They can do their own if they wish, but most of them take their routing recommendations that the company offers, and then go off and they make the deliveries to the house. I was impressed. Viho One claims they have a 99% on-time delivery rate. But what I was impressed with is the number of checks they have in place to make sure the packages that are delivered to your home are correct. Because we've all had packages that don't show up at a house, or the wrong package, or goes to the neighbors. And the drivers, in addition to the Viho workers scanning the packages initially to build the routes, the drivers themselves scan them before they load them into their car. They're then scanned again when they get to the delivery point. Pictures are then taken of the packages on the porch or wherever the customer's instructed the package to be delivered. And then they also take pictures of the house number if it's obvious. And then all that information is actually sent to the customer as soon as the delivery is approved. As soon as the driver says, "Hey, I've made this delivery," the customer then gets all this information sent to them, and they know exactly where their package is, and that hopefully in most cases it's the correct package.
And Brian, real quick follow-up here before we also bring in John Kingston on the conversation. What percentage would you say were gig workers versus employees from your observations?
So they have, I was in a Philadelphia warehouse that they have. The morning that I was there was probably about 10 or 15 Viho employees in the place. They have more as they're receiving goods the day before. Truckloads come in with goods the day before for the next day's deliveries. So there were more people in there at that time. At this time, this was 6 a.m. on a Monday. There were about 10 or 15 Viho employees, and the drivers come in waves, and all the drivers are gig drivers at this point. That's what they use. A lot of them also, they drive Lyft, they drive Uber, Instacart, DoorDash, etc. But many of them, when I talked to the drivers, many of them said that they actually like doing Viho because, unlike a lot of these companies that have gotten into this space, Viho puts these routes together so the driver knows that a route is 2 hours, 4 hours, or 6 hours long. So they know they're going to have X amount of time to work. And the Viho is upfront with the pricing on all these routes. So the driver, when they log in the night before to pick their route, they know how much they're going to get paid to do that route. And so there's a little more consistency with the scheduling there, according to the drivers, as opposed to driving some of the other options that are out there where you may work for 4 hours, but you might only get 3 jobs during that time.
Awesome, and we'll bring in Kingston here. And John, you've covered AB5 from the beginning and kind of looking at it and what it means in California, but then also other states that are kind of looking at copycat laws. How's that going to affect drivers at Viho or at an Uber or Grubhub and things like that?
Thanks. Well, first I want to comment that Brian's head looks like it's about 2 inches under the ceiling, and I'm concerned that he's hiding out like in a safe house or a process server or the IRS or something like that. But anyway, you okay, Brian?
Yeah, I'm fine. It's a rare TV appearance for me, so we don't like to know where we actually are located. We're very stealth that way.
So let me stop being a comedian and answer the question. So AB5 in California, as it applies to gig workers, was put on hold by Prop 22, which was voted on by the voters on Election Day 2020. Got to get my years straight here. Election Day 2020, and it specifically said that gig workers would be exempt from AB5. Now, that then went to court, and a state court decision held that because of a very complicated reasoning involving workers' comp, which I am not qualified to speak on, Prop 22 was unconstitutional. Prop 22, that decision is now on appeal. Actually, I hope to write about where it stands in the appeal next week or two, so we should have an update. But what it means is that for now, the gig workers in California are not covered by Prop 22. Now let's go to the other side of the country and talk about Massachusetts, which is where gig workers attempted, where Uber and Lyft, et cetera, attempted to put a Prop 22 type proposition on the ballot in Massachusetts, and it failed. It failed a test needed to get on the ballot. So that is not going to be there, which means the legal status of gig workers in Massachusetts remains somewhat in doubt. Brian, I have to say, from what I know about independent contractor law, which is not consistent and very conflicting, and is very much open to judicial interpretation. When you told me like they come in at a certain hour, they have a very specific route, et cetera, like that, really, I'm sure in any kind of litigation over that, if one of these drivers wanted to challenge their status as an IC and instead wanted to be viewed as an employee, like that level of control would almost certainly be a matter for the court to look at. And, control is a key part of independent contractor legislation and independent contractor litigation, because the question is, how much does the employer, I'll just say, how much does the company control the worker who is ostensibly is independent, but maybe not. And so that, as you were talking about that, I couldn't help but think control is a very big issue. Finally, the last big thing that's going on now is in Washington. And the Department of Labor has a rule on independent contractors. So the history of this is that there was an Obama rule, which very much was sort of, I'll just say hostile. I'm going to oversimplify here, hostile to the idea of workers as independent contractors, tended to define them more as employees. The Trump administration threw that out, drew up its own rule. That own rule was rolled out in January of 2021, about 2 weeks before Donald Trump was to leave office. The Biden administration came in and yanked that rule and said, we're going to do our own. And then a judge came in and said, well, no, you did that the wrong way, so now the Trump rule is back in effect. And then the Biden administration said, okay, but we're still going to do our own rule. So I sat in on one of the kind of listening sessions that the Department of Labor had on this. And first of all, everybody who called in was an independent contractor who did not want the federal government to kind of tighten up its definition of an independent contractor. And the other thing was, they are all absolutely convinced that the ABC test that is in AB5 will be in this next rule, even though it was not in the rule that was promulgated in the Obama administration. So, look, this all keeps lawyers very busy because if you're going to go from an Obama rule and then to a Trump rule that says something totally different, to a Biden rule that's very much in line with the Obama rule, but maybe it's more because the ABC test is in there. And then if the Republicans get back in after 2024, you're going to have maybe the resumption of the Trump rule. If you're an employer that uses independent contractors, your billable hours with your attorneys to deal with this is going to be massive. It's just going to really whip you left and right. So this is the idea that there's a settled law here. Forget it. There's not.
John, I think you make a great point there. I mean, with changing potentials in administration, a lot of outlets really having to be careful about how they go about employing and whether they classify. And like you said, attorneys are going to be very busy with this one. With that really being an issue, do you see any companies kind of taking on the Transforce model on really being able to essentially setting up a system where independent contractors could work for them as employees? Do you think this could be a potential model for other companies as well?
Well, the Transforce model is what's known as a two-check system, which I have learned is not new to Transforce. It has been in effect, actually, I mean, I found references to it from years and years ago. And it involves Transforce hiring the driver as an employee of Transforce. And then the driver, who owns their own truck, leasing that equipment to the carrier. And we've written some stories on it. They had a couple of webinars on it. They actually identified a company that already is using it and has been using it for a while in anticipation of AB5 becoming the law of the land in trucking. There was another call last week that I sat in on and wrote about earlier this week. And somebody on the call, a woman named Lisa Mitchell, who's the Transforce AB5 specialist in California, said there's really four options now. One is to get out of California. The other is to just hire drivers as employees. And I think I did speak to somebody who said they know some companies where that happened. The third one would be the two-check model. And the fourth one would be the brokerage model, where the carrier, the independent driver goes out and gets their own authority, but that means they got to pay like 20 grand to 30 grand to get their own authority and be insured, because right now that's being taken care of by the carrier. I mean, I will tell you that I have not heard of a fifth option. The fifth option, if anything, might be use of the business-to-business exception in AB5, which is a 12-step point, and you have to hit all 12 steps. Like if you hit 10 of 12, you didn't pass. You got to pass with a grade of 100%. So that's really, if there's another, we'll call the B2B exception option number 5. I've yet to hear what option number 6 is.
Well, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us this morning. This has been, I think, a segment that could go on much longer because there's just so much to this. So John, Brian, thanks so much for being here this morning.
Thank you, guys.
We're going to take our final look at today's headlines.